Hi there, and welcome to Military Histories, a podcast from York Army Museum. Each week we share an interview from the Royal Dragoon Guards audio archive. Throughout March we will be sharing interviews about family life. You can find more details about the Royal Dragoon Guards Oral History Project in the show notes. If you want to find out a bit more about our museum, there are links to our website and social media channels in the show notes too. In this week's interview you can hear Mrs Christine Zambelli, whose husband served with the 4th 7th Royal Dragoon Guards. Thanks for listening. Future episodes will drop every Saturday.
This is an interview with Chrissy Zambelli, the wife of Lieutenant Colonel Keith Zambelli of the 4th 7th Royal Dragoon Guards, taking place on the 18th of July 2013. Hello.
Hello.
First of all, can you give us your place of birth, Chrissy?
Yes, I was born in Batley in Yorkshire.
And this was when? Date of birth?
23rd of January 1947.
And at what stage then did you come across the military life?
Well, when I was 18, 1965, I got a job at the Army Careers Information Office, or just Army, is that what it was called then? Army Recruiting Office, anyway,
yeah.
In Huddersfield. And I was a clerical assistant there. And I really loved it. I mean, that was my first experience of knowing anybody really in the army. In 1967, Keith was actually sent there as a recruiting sergeant. And so this is where we met. He actually should have gone to the York recruiting office, and so we might never have met at all. But something happened, and I can't remember what. He knew, I can't remember. But they relocated him to the Huddersfield office instead of the York one, and everybody knew him as Zam. And we became friendly, and then sort of just developed from there. In 1968, I was actually made redundant, sadly, from that job. They were sort of shuffling around with the civil service, and I had to make room, because I was only young, I had to make room for a more established older person. And so I actually got a job in London for a little while, working for the Ministry of Public Buildings and Works. And it was only then, as I left really, that in July 68, that Keith and I started going out together. And I didn't stay in London too long. I moved back to Yorkshire, and we had a very short engagement. We got engaged in November, and we were married in January 1969, 2 days after my 22nd birthday. Keith was 24 at the time. Keith had by this time returned to his regiment in Omagh, and he was actually being sent out to Libya in May 69 on a 9-month posting. And it was when he found out about this posting that he said, well, it would probably be a good idea if we got married before he was sent away for 9 months, because then we'd get separation points for a married quarter and all this. So that's what we did. So, of course, I got married. After a honeymoon, went back to live with my mum and dad. And then we were actually separated for what turned out to be 16 months. But before we were able to live together in our first married quarter, which was a 2-bedroom flat in Memmelstrasse, Schloss Neuhaus, because the regiment was at that time in Athlone Barracks in Sennelager. So, I mean, I'd never been abroad before, and I didn't really know what to expect of army life, but thankfully Keith had some good friends in the regiment, and I got to know their wives, and people took me under their wing, and I began to make friends. I was a bit lonely at home, so I actually took a job, because I had done office work, but to everybody wanted office work, so you had to go on a waiting list. I didn't bother doing that. I just went to work in the Nuffy, which was in the grounds of the beautiful Schloss at Schloss Neuhaus, just a few minutes away from home.
Yeah, I know that one.
Yes, It was lovely. Beautiful, lovely little walk to work. And so that was fine. I found it a bit scary at first to be part of mess life, because Keith, was in the sergeant's mess then, and felt very young and inexperienced compared to a lot of the others I saw there, because of course, they seemed quite a lot older. In their 30s, I suppose it seemed old to me when I was only in my early 20s. But again, met some really nice people who actually became lifelong friends, especially John and Carol Dolan, who were in there, and we actually stayed in touch with them right until, John died the same year as Keith, and Carol Dolan died just not very long after, a couple of years after. So, and also I remembered Ian Wilson and Ken Loynes, who I'd actually worked with at the recruiting office, because of course they were there when I started that job. It was Ken Loynes who was there first, who went on, became an RSM later on, and then when he left, Ian Wilson came to replace him, and then when Ian Wilson left, it was Keith. So actually I did know a couple of faces in the sergeant's mess from those days. So that was that. And early in 1971, Keith was chosen to be a part of the team who were going to spend 4 months from May to September in Arizona that year at the Yuma Proving Ground. And I think, would it have been the latest Chieftain tank? It was to do trials on a new tank.
Yes, I do believe. People went to America, strangely, to proof fire the Chieftain. Yeah, I think
yes.
Yeah.
So that was that. And I think also, I'm right in saying it was some people from the 1721st Lancers as well. I think there was a whole group of them anyway. And so by the time...
So that meant you didn't go with them, though?
No, this was just an unaccompanied 4-month posting. And I think we decided that... I can't remember whether we found out first, but I actually had our first son in December 1971, and I think we decided that rather than I stay in Germany while Keith was away for 4 months, I would go back to my parents. We gave up the quarter. I went back to my parents and stayed with them whilst he was away. And so I ended up staying in Yorkshire until our eldest son Mark was born on the 2nd of December 71. So, and then at the end of that month, Keith was having leave then, because he'd just
been unaccompanied.
Yes. So we had leave, and then I think very early in the new year 72, we set off with a brand new baby back to Germany, and the regiment was still in Sennelager, but our married quarter this time was in Paderborn. And it was near, I'm just trying to think of the barracks, is it Allenbrook? Allenbrook Barracks, I think it was, not far from the Toc H in Paderborn. And again, I've got lots of fond memories of that place, because I could walk into Paderborn with pushing the pram within a few minutes, met some nice people.
So how did you find the married quarter, living in married quarter process with a brand new baby in this case?
Well, it was actually a really nice house, because the first flat we'd had in Schloss Neuhaus, the thing I remembered about it, which seemed really awful to me, and I mean, being young, you don't sort of think, oh, you're going to be mad on doing lots of housework and everything. I just remember things like us having just a carpet square in the middle of the room, and then round the edges were these awful, dark, almost black, shiny floors, some sort of compound or whatever it was, all sort of polished, highly...
Which had to be highly polished.
Yes.
Yeah.
And, I just thought, oh dear, that didn't seem a really... But people seem to...
Amazing curtains and furniture.
Oh, and
G-plan furniture, was it?
And curtains, carpets and loose covers that didn't seem to match. I mean, that's what I remember about the early days. Even this nice house in Senelager, it was a little terrace house, and it was lovely. The nicest thing about that was, because I suppose they were established German buildings, old German buildings, they had wonderful parquet floors downstairs. Right. So although we had these carpet squares again in the middle,
this time it was wood.
Oh, it was
parquet.
Lovely. A really nice, light, sort of medium coloured parquet floor. In fact, they did sort of resurface them whilst we were living in there, which wasn't very nice, sort of. But yes, I mean, it was okay. But then that same year in 72, Keith was sent to Northern Ireland to do a tour in Northern Ireland in May. And of course, in the middle of all the troubles. So that was a very worrying time, because we only had the radio in those days, and each time you'd hear that a soldier had been killed you worried, and the names were never released until the families knew. So that was quite awful, and we did have a couple of fatalities in the regiment. I think one was due to somebody throwing something through, a window of a vehicle or something. But
so how did you actually cope as the wife, sitting in the house? Did you wait to see if somebody went somewhere else, or did you wait? Do you frantically listen to every radio message?
Oh no, I didn't. I wasn't paranoid about it. It was just that for company, with being alone and having a baby, then I tended to have the radio on quite a bit. But no, I had some good neighbours, and of course I didn't drive in those days, and so to go to the NAFI, things like going to the NAFI was an adventure, because we had to get on a bus, and instead of it taking us to Schlossneuhaus NAFI, because we were in Paderborn now, it took us to the NAFI in Barker Barracks in Paderborn, so that was fine, and I can't remember how many times it went a week, but I mean I used to do that. And
so you got round the worry or the aspect of waiting to see if...
Yes, by keeping...
with community or friends, etc.
Yes, and also by having family to visit. My father never actually came out to Germany, which was such a shame, but he was quite happy for my mother to come out, and I had, I still have, obviously, this sister, but she's a lot younger than me. There are 13 years, we've got a brother in between, but there's a 13-year gap with me and my sister. And my mother and my sister came out to visit me during that summer when Keith was away. Also, my brother and his girlfriend were on a hitchhiking holiday around Europe. They came to stay as well. So it was fine. But I had a scary experience in that house, and it was really weird. One nice day, we were actually in the house, and I looked out of the window into the back garden to see a man jump over the fence into my garden, and he had a gun in his hand. And I thought, straight away, oh God, what's this all about? So I quickly went and put all the shutters down. You know how the German houses have these security shutters on the outside. So I dropped all the shutters quickly, and I probably went upstairs, but I don't think I really nosed out of the window too much, because I didn't know what was happening. A little while later, I did hear some shots fired as well, and it turned out, by asking neighbours and finding out, after the event, it was actually a plainclothes German policeman, and they were in pursuit of some wrongdoer who was actually... obviously making his way through the gardens, because we only had chain link fences about 3 feet high, and he actually shot at this bloke. I think it climbed onto somebody's balcony further down the street, but I mean I didn't really hear any more about that, but that was a bit frightening. That was
an example of the German police in action.
Yes, it was.
No messing.
But Major Dangerfield's wife, Sally Dangerfield, you used to come and pick me up I think it was every week we had these wives' club get-togethers in the day for the wives whose husbands were in Northern Ireland, and she used to drive down from Senalaga, pick me up and Mark, and she had a young child then as well. Roland was small. I think her little girl must have been at school then, and she used to very kindly take me into Athlone Barracks, into the wives' club, and then, back again, run me home again afterwards. And so we had these things every week, so that was quite nice to get together.
Day's monotony.
Yes, because of course, like me being in Paderborn, I was away from
The rest of the wives.
the rest of the wives. There was another wife lived down the end of our street that I got to know. So I mean, I suppose we went walking with the babies together and that kind of thing. I'm just trying to think. After Paderborn, and I think after that we went to Tidworth, and we had an end terrace house in Lahore Close. What I remember about this married quarter, well, a few things actually, but first of all, it was one of these that I don't know how the people got away with marching out of it, because Keith had said it was absolutely filthy, and a friend's wife helped him clean it, because when we'd come back from Germany, I'd gone to spend some time with my parents, and I suppose Keith had then gone down to Tidworth on his own, to take over a married quarter, and when he did, he was horrified, because he said it was, absolutely filthy, really. So somebody helped him clean it, so that's what I remember about that.
Of course, that was before the days of contract cleaning and everything now that is relevant now. So this is all done. This is going back to when wives had to spotlessly clean the married quarter themselves.
Yes, and of course, having done it twice before myself then, because you soon get to grips with the army system, don't you, and understand that's what you have to do. You've got to have a march out.
Estate wardens.
And whenever we did march out of quarters, in fact, never ever was I present on a march out, because Keith would always send me off to, I suppose, just in case anyone found fault with anything, and I might have been highly offended. And he always sent me off to a neighbour. So I mean, and actually we used to joke about it sometimes and say, crikey, our quarters were cleaner when we were leaving them than they'd ever been when we lived there, Yeah. But this is what we had to do, didn't we, in those days?
That's right. It was an incredible 2-3 weeks of sheer drudgery and torture getting these quarters ready for the estate warden.
So how this person managed to hand that one over, I just don't know. But anyway, that was, that was all right. He had help. So that was really nice. And lovely part of the world again. My Dad was a big sort of history and archaeology hobbyist, and so he used to love coming down, and we used to go off to see all the places, Silbury Hill and Old Sarum and all things like that were round about. So I mean, they used to come down and stay with me quite a lot then. And of course, sometimes if Keith was away on exercise, then it was nice to have your family keep you company. So I did enjoy that place, and actually it was whilst we were there that I had our second son. So we must have been there about 3 years, and Simon was born in Tidworth Military Hospital in January 74. But things. It's strange when you start thinking about things. I remember this quarter was an end quarter, and there was a hill up the road. There was an incline, As you walked up the road, it was to the school where Mark did start his first sort of junior school. And one day we had a brick wall at the side of our garden, and one day, luckily we were out. We'd come back from, perhaps I'd been shopping or I don't know where we'd been, but with the two children, had come back home to find a car had careered down the road, and I think a child had got into his dad's car, taking the handbrake off, and this car zoomed down the road and ended up coming down this grassy bank and knocked our garden wall down and in on the garden, which, you know, it could have been really quite nasty. It was in the summer, and Mark was sort of 2.5, I suppose, 3, could have been out there playing, so that was quite nasty. But they soon fixed that again.
Nobody in the car?
Well, I don't think there was. Again, it was a thing, you know, luckily we weren't there when it actually did happen, so nobody was hurt, I don't think. It was just this car, you know, because it was a hill, and this grassy bank, it came off the road onto the pavement, down this grassy bank. Our wall was at the bottom of this grassy bank, so it just came to a stop.
Can you remember your experiences in Tidworth Military Hospital, which is of course no longer there? I mean, again, unusual experience? Military nurses, doctors?
Not really, not unusual. They were just really good. I just found it all really good. I had a friend who used to look after...
it was military doctors and nurses, wasn't it?
Yes, it was, all military. We had a doctor, actually, who was a bit of a joker. He was always saying things. I remember a friend of mine had gone to see him, and she must have had to have an examination, and he'd said to her, "Oh dear, that's a dreadful scar down, you know, where did you get this terrible scar from?" And it was the crease, the seam of her tights down her tummy from the front, and he was just a real joker. He used to make
people relax,
rude remarks and things sometimes, but yes, Dr. Herbert, his name was. He was very amusing and funny. But no, I mean, it was okay, because when I'd had my first son, it had been in the maternity home in Batley, where I was actually born myself, and so when I had Simon, being in the military hospital, it was a different, you know, experience, I suppose, but I don't remember anything awful about it. No, it was, you know...
No, I was hoping it was going to be a good experience.
Oh, yes, it was.
It's just the uniqueness of
good.
a military hospital.
It was
not
good.
Many people have been through that.
It was good, and I think they well, I don't know, they just did their best, and it was not like it is these days. There were always enough nurses, and it just seemed to run...
Good experience.
Yeah, it was good experience. Yes, definitely. The only strange thing about that quarter in Tidworth, which is worth a mention, really, it was haunted, which I know sounds really ridiculous, but it was, if that's the right word to use. My father was babysitting one night. Keith was away, and my mum, my sister and myself had gone off to visit a friend for the evening and left my dad in charge. So, and at this time the children were small. We must have had to put the children into our bedroom, which was a big bedroom that went from the back to the front of the house. So it had a window at the back of the house and at the front. And it being a long room, I suppose we put Simon's cot in there and Mark on a camp bed, I imagine. But anyway, they were in that room so my parents could have the other small room. And when we came back in, about 10:30 or 11 at night, my dad said, I said, "Have the children been all right?" "Oh yes, they've been fine." He said, "But Mark's been out of bed and he's been running up and down, you know, upstairs. He's been going from..." And I knew he wouldn't have done that. He was one, if he woke in the night, or if you know, after you put him to bed, he would have cried and cried out. He wouldn't have
been going back
he wouldn't have wandered about. So my dad had heard these little footsteps, and because he hadn't rushed to see what it was, he didn't bother, you see. He thought, oh, well, the child's not crying, I'll just leave it. And he listened to it for ages. Whereas whenever I had heard it, which I had on numerous occasions, I always assumed, oh, listen, he's out of bed. So I would go rushing off upstairs only to find him fast asleep in his room. And it happened lots of times.
Really?
And we found out actually later, my parents were going home the next day and Keith was away on exercise. But when I spoke to a neighbour of mine along the road, she used to babysit for me, and I told her about it. And she said, oh, I'm glad you've said, because I was just going to say that I didn't want to babysit for you anymore, because it put the wind up her. It happened so many times that she would hear these little footsteps running about, and then she would go up and the children would be in bed. And she was frightened by it. And, you just sort of think, well, I don't know, strange things. And it definitely was, on the floor upstairs. It wasn't outside, or it wasn't the neighbours.
Did we ever go any further with this? Did we actually get any experts? Or?
And I wished I had tried to do, but I think with having two small children and shortly then to be leaving to go to
gave it to somebody else
Germany
to sort
again. But what we did do, because this girl who babysat for me, and it sounds a really stupid thing to admit to and to say, but our husbands were away on exercise, and she was Catholic and she had some holy water. And she came along one day with her holy water, and we went upstairs and she sprinkled holy water about and said a little prayer, I think. And because we worried that this poor little child, it must have been a poor little child who'd been unhappy or left alone or something. And it was really strange, because after that to when we actually left, I didn't hear the footsteps again. But I did have a strange experience when we'd been away visiting my mum and dad, I think, and it was after this had happened. When we came back, I had a radio in the kitchen that didn't work. Its batteries had gone. And when we came back, I heard voices in the kitchen, and when I went in, this radio was playing, and I remember the words, and it was a man's voice saying, oh, and that was Funny Goings On by, and it was as if it was a play that had just happened. And I went over and turned the radio off straight away, thinking, well, that was Funny Goings On, yeah, definitely. And when I tried to put it back on again, it wouldn't work, because I knew the batteries were dead. So, that was just like a funny little ending to that sort of thing. But
spiritual.
But yes, I'd had we been there longer, I think I would have tried to find out. I don't think I knew what to do. And Keith, you see, Keith never heard this. It happened lots of times when he was sitting with me, and I heard it every time and he didn't. I used to say, oh, listen, did you hear that? No, he never heard a thing. But they do say, don't they, about things like that some people can hear them and
treat it. If the court was still standing, it probably isn't.
But it is still there actually, because a couple of years back, some regimental friends came and stayed with me for a few days, and we went to Tidworth to just have a look at it for old time's sake. And actually, we did go and look at our old married quarters, and that one was still there. Yeah, so.
You don't say which one it was.
Well, 36 Lahore Close it was. But, and it was funny, and Mark as well, you see, my dad remembered this. Mark had said when he was a little boy, he was frightened up there in that house, and he said there was a man in the bedroom. And so there was definitely something, and it had definitely something. It wasn't
some history of some sort.
It must have had.
One for the experts.
Yes, maybe it might be possible to find out one day. And then we left Tidworth and we went to Fallingbostel. And I'm just trying to think. First of all, where did we live in? Was it Fallingbostel? Must have been when the children were small. and we lived in a flat. Heidemark. Is that Fallingbostel? Yes, it is, I think.
So we're now in North Germany now. Yeah, with 2 young sons.
Yes, back in Germany, living in sort of four-storey flats, I suppose they were. We were on the 3rd floor, so ground floor first, second, and then 3rd would be the top, wouldn't it? So we were on the 2nd floor, and with lots of people in our regiment in that block who I got to know, because when I married Keith, he was a sergeant. I hadn't sort of had that chance to get to know lots of people, you know.
Right.
I'd never been in the corporal's mess, and so I didn't know. There were a lot of the younger ones I didn't know, apart from I was always a regular at going to the Wives Club, which was held once a month, I think. But I had some very nice neighbours, and again a couple from the regiment, Margaret and John Leonard. John Leonard died just a year ago, and he didn't stay in the army. He had they had 3 sons, 3 boys, and I had my 2, and we had our 2, and they used to all play together. They lived across the landing from us, and I think he might have been a corporal, and Keith was a WO2, I think, at this time. But we used to, because you're in Germany and your families are far away and you can't always go home for Christmas, we used to spend time with them.
Right.
Socially sometimes, and we'd babysit for each other because they'd be in the corporal's mess and you know, we were in the sergeant's mess. So, and that was again, you know, happy times really. I just think I was always...
You learned to get the community spirit
yes,
up and running.
And always adaptable, and I never, although I can moan for England now sometimes about things, but I never complained. I just think you just made the best of it.
Yeah.
You know, it was an adventurous sort of life, something different. I didn't always like it in the beginning. Going to a new place, it seemed just a bit disconcerting, having to then find your way around and find where everything was. And
again,
all that.
with the foreign language as well.
Yes, and of course, you know, you pick up bits of that, don't you, really?
Yeah.
We had German courses on records, which sometimes we used to play, but then I did try once with a friend going to evening class, and I'm afraid we gave it up after a few weeks, but you know, I mean...
I think most of us are guilty on that.
Yes, but then of course, you know, we still had books, and so, and it's surprising, even now if I go back to Germany, well, I haven't been back since Keith died, but we used to go sometimes and visit some other army friends, and it's surprising what knowledge you do pick up and how it comes back to you when you're actually in the country again. It's surprising what you know. And we used to manage to chat to people at cocktail parties in the officers' mess later on. You know, you sort of manage just to hold simple conversations with people.
Yeah.
But it was in Fallingbostel that I actually learnt to drive, and Keith taught me to drive without ever. I think he only got a little bit shirty once and upset me, and he was such a patient. He was so good, because you know, people say you should never do that, don't they? Teach your wife to drive, but he did, and he used to take me out of an evening, sometimes with both the children sitting in the back, you know, like in their car seats in the back. And we'd drive into, was it Valsroder, I think, which was just down, and all around, you know, on the ranges, of course, we'd go in the beginning. Yes, it was really good, and I think it was only about 6 weeks or so that I actually took my test and I actually passed. And the aforementioned John Leonard, who'd been our next door neighbour, he was actually in the MT unit at that time, and he was one who sort of sat with me. He sat in the back, and then we had somebody, I don't know who the driving instructor was, but that was in the days where you could have an army driving instructor. You didn't actually have to do the German thing, did you?
No, that's right. You passed the matrix test instead.
Yes.
Yeah.
But that was all very good, and I say he was so patient. Only got a bit cross with me once in all that time, so I must have not been too bad.
It's been pretty good.
So that was good, and then of course I remember things like going to the sergeant's mess maybe for the summer ball, and people staying sort of all night and having breakfast in the morning, that kind of thing, and say with having a good friend babysitting, she used to just sleep until we came back in the morning. And then you'd... and
they were balls to be remembered, weren't they?
Yes, they were. Really, really good times and wonderful buffets. The thing that I must not forget to mention, I think, about any of these, all these big do's that ever we had in the Sergeant's Mess, the buffets were absolutely spectacular and out of this world. All the artistry and creation that went into these things, there'd be like waterfalls with bits of, with lobsters at the bottom, and, all, well, really wonderful things that I wish I'd taken photographs of, really. It sounds silly, but, they're really, really quite spectacular, and you don't see that kind of thing anymore, do you, really?
No, unfortunately, no, we don't. That's one of the big things we miss now. Can you remember at the time living in as a family with TV, the problems of TV? Initially, I would imagine we would still be looking at German TV at this point.
Yes.
And can you remember the advent?
Yes.
Getting close to now when BFPS TV must have been appearing.
Yes, I can. Going back to when Keith was in Northern Ireland and Mark was a baby, I think we had bought a television then, and perhaps he'd got it for me and to be a bit of company, but all we had, I think, then was the German TV. So we would, put it on sometimes and watch. I think you could get things with subtitles sometimes, but I mean, so that wasn't very good. But by the time we'd gone to Fallingbostel, then there was SSVC, as it was known, wasn't it?
Yes.
SSVC, and they did a pretty good job, as I recall, of taking what they considered would be the best programmes from the channels that we had in England, which I think we might have had Channel 4 by then, I'm not sure, maybe not, maybe it was only BBC 1, 2 and ITV, I can't remember, but they used to choose a selection of programmes and show them to us all on one channel, and it was really good to know that something might have been on the ITV in England, but when you saw it over there it didn't have any adverts in it, so that was good. And I did write to them and ask them to put on I, Claudius, which only recently has been re-shown on BBC 4, I think it was, and that was a really popular thing, and they did actually, my letter did have results, and they did actually show it to us, because I think it had been on in England, but then we'd not seen it out there, and so they actually did show it, and a really good series it was as well. But yes,
so that became quite a boon for families left behind as the men went
either
overseas or back out on the FTXs.
It definitely did, and even just having that basic one channel, and all right, you might not have wanted to watch everything that was on it, so you just turn it off, wouldn't you? But I mean, it was a real boon. It was, yeah. And it was whilst we were in Fallingbostel that Keith was made RSM. I should know exactly what year that was, shouldn't I? But off the top of my head, I can't just remember. And we had to move then, because him being the RSM, we were Lumsden Barracks in Fallinbostel. We had to move to an RSM's flat, which was just along the road from Lumsden Barracks, and it was just a block of 4 flats, and I think they were all RSMs lived in those on Queen's Avenue. And the boys were still quite small, but that was a wonderful flat, because having left this one on the 3rd floor, which again, the flats in Germany were always wonderful, weren't they? Always
very nice,
spacious, you know, really
good quality, I always thought.
Really good. Yes, and the spaciousness. I mean, the living room we had, even in this big flat, it was the first time we actually bought a piece of furniture, those big items known as shranks, which
the famous shrank,
a German shrank, and that shrank, well, is still going. The house we had before I came to live in this one alone, I couldn't accommodate my shrank, and so it was left in the house. And I know for a fact that most of it is still there in the same room where we left it. And it was bought when Simon was 2 years old, so yes, 1976 then, that was when we bought that, I'm sure. So we must have been in Fallinbostel then. But yes, when Keith was RSM, things change quite a bit, don't they then? Because no more, well, not that he ever was always by my side, because he wasn't that sort of a man, but you know, if you went out into the sergeant's mess on a Saturday evening, you would have your little group of friends and sit together and things. And of course, when he became RSM, we used to go along. I think I might have said to him something. I don't know why you bothered taking me, because I never see you from the minute we get there until like we come home. But again, you adapt to it and you understand the reasons why. And I had lots of friends, so you know that was fine.
You weren't left.
But he would sometimes get called, you know, out to deal with things that had happened and family sort of incidents and things like that, and then, you know, somebody else would have to take me home, maybe have to escort me home, and then he would stay on.
Carry out his duties, so very busy period.
And the schools there, we haven't touched on schools yet, have we? Because Mark started school when we were in Tidworth, but because he was only very small, I suppose he wasn't there for long. And then we moved to Fallinbostel, and they had some really good schools in Fallinbostel. There was 2 junior schools called Scott School and Shackleton School, which were side by side, and our children went to Scott School eventually. I mean, Simon went to the regimental kindergarten, which when we were in the RSM's flat, it was just across the road. Mind you, he must have been at kindergarten, was he, before Keith was RSM, and then he was at the junior school. But the schools were nearby, and they were good schools, and they had a middle school as well at Fallinbostel, but mine didn't go to that one. And I actually did get a job. I had worked in the regimental kindergarten for a while, and I worked at one of the schools as a classroom assistant as well. For a little while at Shackleton School, the other school, you know, that my children went to, the one next to it, and so that was okay. Gave you a bit of a a bit of an interest. Once the children are at school, then you could sort of go off and do something.
Yep.
Because
it's back to the same problem again, lack of employment or something to occupy all the wives.
Yes, it is.
Young wives with nothing to do.
And I think, I know it was a problem later, I suppose, especially officers' wives, and they might have had really good jobs, or not to say that soldiers' wife might not have had a really good job, but I think it tended to be maybe the officers' wives who had to give up really good jobs to be with their husbands.
BOR, yeah.
Yes. So yes, employment was, and I didn't, apart from having jobs at the schools, which I did, and the kindergarten. It was later on, when we were actually in Detmold, that I actually started working for the library service. So I actually worked in one of the little army libraries.
Yes.
But that was when we went to Detmold. So from Fallingbostel, we must have gone, we had years in Fallingbostel, a long time in Fallingbostel, and then we must have gone from there to Catterick, and that was when Keith was commissioned. So the regiment went to Catterick, and Keith must have gone off on his officer's course. I once again went back to my mum and dad and stayed with them for a bit whilst Keith was on this course, and Mark and Simon went to the local school, or it perhaps was only Mark. Mark went to the local school anyway in West Yorkshire, and was ribbed a lot by a lot of these children, because he, in West Yorkshire, people have very broad Yorkshire accents, and Mark, of course, being an army child, army children tend not to have an accent, do they? It's amazing.
Right. It wasn't there.
It's quite surprising how it happens, really, because if you've got a southern parent like Keith was, who used to say Castle and Bath, and me who would be northern and say Castle and Bath, and then you'd end up with children who didn't really have an accent. But I don't know whether that's still the case, but I mean, they certainly didn't have
being different.
And of course they sounded quite posh to these kids in West Yorkshire.
Dialect. Yeah.
And then they used to take the mickey out of him and call him Hitler because they knew he'd lived in Germany. That was probably the only thing the kids knew about, putting two and two. So he didn't actually enjoy it. He was at this school for a few weeks, and then when we went up to live in Catterick, then I suppose he sort of, I was going to say settled in. That wasn't a very good school that he went to. His teacher there wasn't very, very good.
Right.
One of the teachers, she sent vocabulary book home with 3 words misspelt. I remember the words as well. And I was going to complain to and Mark said, "Oh no, don't," because she didn't like him, and I think she used to, because he was quite bright and he used to mess about. If he could do what the lessons were
very quickly,
and then he would mess about a bit, and so she had this thing for him, and so because I mean he wasn't a naughty child, but
he had idle time because he had been picked up that he could actually cope with the work.
But then he knew that she sort of picked on him, and so he wouldn't let me complain about this, this spellings thing. But I mean, for a teacher to write in a vocabulary book misspelt words, he was writing a story, and one of the words was electrocuted, and she'd spelt it like electric instead of electrocuted. She'd spelt that wrong. Quarry, she'd put an E in quarry. And fuel, she'd spelt like a Yule log, F-U-L-E, which was really, But anyway, that's me digressing. But that was, so that school in Catterick, I'm not sure. The teachers might well have been. I'm not saying they were army teachers. I think they were probably civvy teachers, weren't they, at these schools?
I would imagine so, yes, at this stage, yes. Well,
Because
being in UK, yeah.
yes, because in Catterick, being a big place, and you'd have lots of army
Garrison
children
town,
there.
isn't it? Yeah.
Yes, but that was our first officers' quarter in Catterick, and it was really lovely. You know, and again, it was so nice for me to be near my parents. So my parents used to come and stay with us quite often, and we would go down and visit them. So it was, again, all a bit too short, really. I think we were perhaps only there for a couple of years in Catterick, but it was, you know, really good. And daunting things I remember about going from the sergeant's mess to the officers' mess. I think the most strange thing for me was, as you know, in army life, we're a very respectful society, and the wives at Wives Club would refer to each other as Mrs, especially, you know, if they were officers' wives, and the officers' wives would refer to the soldiers' wives as Mrs always. And I then had to change, and I was then allowed to call some of the officers' wives that I actually had known for quite some time. I was suddenly able to call them by their Christian names, and I found that impossible, really. It just didn't seem right, you know, it just didn't seem right, and I think it took me an awful long time before I could do it, so I used to avoid
saying the names at all.
Yes, avoid speaking their names. I used to just
speak.
Yes,
Yeah.
so I found that quite hard, but
yes, because you suddenly feel as though you're on a different level, don't you? Even though you've now joined them, you're still actually.
Well, I think it's because you're so used to having had this divide. It was difficult for me to accept that. Yes, all right, then that was fine now that Keith was an officer, so I could call them Jenny or Carolyn or whatever it was. Yeah. But then I found I couldn't do it for a long time because it didn't seem right, really.
Yeah.
But not that there were any reasons, you know, to find fault with any of them, because they were all absolutely wonderful.
Yeah.
Everyone was so welcoming, and they were, you know, I never ever had any angst or anything, you know, any problems with anyone like that. They were all.
It's just the mindset, because you were, you know, all moving on, isn't it?
I suppose it is, because you're so used to all my married life. I'd been, you know, I'd sort of. It's just. It's a bit like that thing, I suppose. It's sort of knowing your place, isn't it? In the hierarchy and everything.
Yes,
it's just it's
changing the levels as you go.
Yes. So so I think that's the thing that stands out as the biggest obstacle, I suppose. And of course, when you're in England, you don't have so many social functions, whether you're sergeant's mess or officer's mess, because there are more of those when you're living in Germany, aren't there?
Yes, that's right. Yes, the weekends everybody's disappeared to all parts of the country.
So so that was an enjoyable time, and again I look back on that, you know, lots of happy memories. Really near to Richmond, where the married quarter was, and so I could pop into Richmond, and you know, it was nice. Both the boys at school, and it was from there that Mark, we talked about it and decided, we didn't quite know really, but then we decided, well, maybe we'd let him go to boarding school, and actually when we did come to leave Catterick at the end of our time there, and go to Detmold, Mark was left behind because by then he started boarding school at near Selby in Yorkshire when he was almost 11, and then that was really horrible. I remember that, that was awful as a mum.
Yes.
Leaving your child there, and he was a bit teary, and I was more than a bit teary. Well, you try not to be, but sort of all the way home, and that was really awful. And then what seemed worst of all was when we did move to Detmold, and, you sort of wake up the first morning thinking, oh, your son's hundreds of miles away.
Mm-hmm.
So that was quite hard to do, but he was not far from my parents, and so half-term holidays, which were very short, he was able to go to them, and they really enjoyed it because it meant that they got to see him. And also the same applied to Simon later, because after when Simon was old enough, a couple of years later, he also went to the same school. Right. So that was, it did work out in the end.
Experience that worked out in the end.
Yes, it did.
Yeah.
Because you're sort of unsure. I mean, as it was, we ended up being in Detmold for 8 years. We were there a long time. I mean, the children, Mark could have finished his education there, but we were thinking, well, it was sort of an hour a day, I think, on a bus. I think they might have had to go to Sloter School or something like that. I'm not really sure, but it was a long, we sort of thought about it, and I just think, well, and I think it does children good. I think I've asked them since they've been grown up, I don't think they regretted the experience at all, so I think it was good. And yes, that was another married quarter, a nice garden, and
Did you have the cellar experience?
Yes, well, the cellar experience, do you mean with the...
Well, the fact that a lot of these quarters
that we
do
had
have cellars.
Wonderful. Yes, again, the Germans have got such brilliant ideas, and I think we could learn a lot from them even now. Yes, these wonderful cellars in every house, with room for the washing machine, so you've got your washing machine down there, sort of laundry room, you've got a room where the boiler is, haven't you, with the, for the central heating. And actually, we did make use of one of the rooms. We used to have lots of shelves down there and use it for, groceries and overspill and all that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And then one time, Keith's sister and husband came out to spend a holiday with us, and Mark and Simon were home from school, and so we let our guests have that room, the big, the sort of big room upstairs that Mark used to use, and Mark camped on a camp bed down the cellar in one of these. Mind, I don't think he was all that thrilled with the spiders. He was probably about 16 then, right. But I mean, he slept down.
Good overspill.
We had an old piece of carpet in there, and it was really quite a good solution. But yes, the cellars were wonderful, very, very.
Yes. Did you ever come across any that have been converted into private bars, if you like, hotel?
No, I didn't.
Right.
No.
No. Some of them did get converted into sort of party rooms, if you like. And
no, I didn't. But
they were extremely functional, floor level. These amazing cellars that every house seemed to have.
Yeah. But I just thought of something now. I am skipping about a bit. When Keith was RSM, this was in Fine-Bostel, the Duchess of Kent was our Colonel-in-Chief, and she'd visited the regiment on another occasion. But this time, because Keith was RSM, we had to greet her I presume it must have been at the sergeant's mess, and there were, you know, families around, and that she was going to speak to, and all this kind of thing. And it was such a privilege, and so not, you know, what a nice thing to be able to do. And I was thinking, oh yes, it'd be lovely. There was a chap there taking photographs and everything. Well, at the end of it, the person who was taking the photographs hadn't put a film in his camera, and so that is, you know, what should have been lovely memories for us, you know,
right.
actually greeting her, you know, and being the ones who, and having, you know, all these photographs didn't exist. And he was a chap in the regiment, I won't say his name, I think he's been dead a long time, but I mean, it was so disappointing.
That's
because
right. You had to rely on other people's photos then, I presume.
Well, I never got any. I didn't get any. I have no photographs of that occasion at all. So that was just disappointing. She did, you know, she did visit us on a number of occasions there, and I mean, I think it was there. I have got a photograph of Keith being presented with his long service and good conduct medal by her. But no, I mean, it's just things that should have been there, special, and have gone, you know, lost and gone forever. So that's a shame. Yeah. That was a shame about that. But you know, we had lots of happy times in the 8 years in Detmold.
Yeah. Normal BOR life.
Yes, and a wonderful officers' mess, because the barracks we had there, Hobart Barracks, had been to do with the Luftwaffe, and as I mentioned before, I worked in the library there in 36 AEC, in that building, and the rooms that the library was in were, now was it? There was Hermann Göring. Was he the Luftwaffe chap? Hermann Göring.
Yeah.
Wasn't he? The
yes,
fattish,
yes, yeah.
the fattish one.
Not 100% sure on that one.
I think it was Hermann Göring. I think, and they said that I think it was him. Those were his staterooms when you know, before the war and at different times, when it had been just a Luftwaffe, he had lived in what was, you know, the 36 AEC. He actually lived in these rooms. It was sort of his apartment, and in this little cupboard, we had this little store cupboard, was where there was it had all nice wooden panelling, this big room, and there was this little cupboard tucked to the side, and I'm sure somebody told me, oh yes, it used to have a little sink in there. I think he was one of these. It was a bit like Howard Hughes, that chap, you know, sort of always washing his hands, a bit sort of compulsive, and he had this little sink in the cupboard. But so that was where the library was. I never saw the ghost of Hermann Göring, I'm glad to say, on a dark night when I
thought you might have called him out somehow.
But so that was good.
So what happened after Detmold then?
Well, it was here to where we are now. We were 8 years in Detmold, and Keith had, you know, gone. I think he was a major by the time we left. He'd been trying to get a posting back to England, and we came in 1991. And I think it was the 16th of January. I know it was in January. I think it might have been the 16th, but it was on the day that the first Gulf War started, because on the last morning in our married quarter in Detmold, When Keith woke me, because he was always up first, I got up and he said, oh, the RAF had gone in and bombed Iraq, I think, hadn't they? They'd gone in, and it was on that day that we actually handed over the quarter and came back to England. And Keith was QM of the Junior Leaders Regiment for a little while. That's the job he came to do. And I forget how long he did that job before they asked him to be the staff quartermaster. And it wasn't all that long before the junior leaders, gave up.
Then. Yeah, it was being closed down then.
And what was nice about that for him, really, it would have been nice if he'd been the very last QM there, because that's where he actually started off his army career as a junior leader at Bovington.
So he must have handed it. Was it Brian Bell then?
In 1959, yes, it was. Brian Bell was the one who was the last one, yes. Mm. So then, of course, Keith had gone across to be the staff quartermaster, and and then it's all change again, isn't it? Because then when we came back to this country, we decided, well, we wouldn't bother going into married quarters this time. We actually bought an ex-Navy quarter the other side of Weymouth. That was our our very first home that we owned.
So that's after how many years we eventually find our own house, isn't it?
Yes. I mean, we'd been, well, it was in 1991. We were married in 1969, 69, 89, 91. About 22 years. Yeah.
Yep.
Would be, wouldn't it? After 22 years of marriage, because it hadn't seemed. Some friends of ours had owned homes and they'd rented them out to people whilst they were away, and we used to hear horror stories sometimes about how they'd go back and the place would have been wrecked or things had happened, and we decided not to bother. Yeah. One of Keith's hobbies and interests was the stock market, which my dad got him interested in a lot of years previously. My dad had been given some shares. He worked at the ICI in Huddersfield for a long, long time, and I think then instead of Christmas bonuses, they used to give them shares, and a lot of the men used to just sell them. He kept his, and he got Keith interested in the stock market, and he was pretty good at
following the tables.
He was, and so he was, so really, although we didn't have a house which would have made us money, I think he was pretty good at
making money
at doing it his own way.
Yeah.
So so that was our first, and for the first time then after those years of marriage, I felt like a civvy then for the first time since I'd been married, because of course, had we gone into married quarters in Bovington, it would have carried on, wouldn't it? A bit more of the same. Yeah. And I always thought the houses in Foxbury looked rather lovely, and I never lived in one. But no, we decided we bought this. I
think I was housing commandant at that time.
Really?
Yeah.
But yes, it was different. But I was lucky in as much as we'd only been here a few months. We moved here in January, and in July, beginning of July, I got a job in Weymouth Library. So I worked at Weymouth Library then, for like 20 years.
Really? For that length of time?
So, so whilst Keith, was travelling to and from Bovington, and again he enjoyed it, and in 1998 someone had put him forward to have the MBE, and so he was very privileged and lucky to have got that. And we had a very memorable few days up in London with the family. We took both my sons and their girlfriends, and they waited for us outside. The girls had to wait outside Buckingham Palace because, of course, you can only take 3 guests in, can't you?
Yeah.
So that was rather lovely, and it was Prince Charles who presented Keith with his medal. And of course, by that time, Prince Charles had been our Colonel-in-Chief for quite a while, took over from the Duchess of Kent when she sort of went into, she stopped being in the public eye, didn't
Retirement,
she?
yeah.
Yes. And so, that was a lovely, lovely, happy, memorable day.
Yeah, but it was.
So, yes.
And then he finally kept going serving, and then went to RO, didn't he?
Well, yes,
Yeah.
because Keith did manage actually to. He did that job, his last job. He did it in uniform for a number of years, and then he also did it as a civilian. For a couple of years as well, until he retired. A few years, I think it must have been.
We were both retired officers at the same time then.
Yes. So he went, then in civvies he was going, and it took a while for them to get someone to replace him. So he didn't retire at 60, which he'd been thinking he probably would. So he was, he must have been 61. Almost 61 when he actually gave up work, because we went off to France and had a week's holiday. I remember, when he sort of retired completely. And but then sadly, it was only the following May that we found out that he had terminal bowel cancer. So, all your dreams shattered, aren't they, then?
Somewhat then at that point. Yeah.
All the things we were going to do together.
In the retirement, yeah.
So
this is why I always tell people now, because I did it at 60 and I was lucky enough to get away at 60.
Yes.
But I always say to people, do it.
I think because my
if
dad,
you're thinking of it, you've got to do it.
My dad had done it as well. He'd taken early retirement, and he was always, saying to Keith, yes, do, because then. But my dad went on to live a long life afterwards,
right.
and
so he was able to.
Yes, but I don't know if there's anything. I'm sure there are things I've missed, and things that I've, forgotten to speak about. But
so the regimental family, still strong in your.
Well,
vision?
I'm still in touch with lots of people from the regiment, and I think it's a lovely thing, isn't it? I think that was. I found that because it's all anyway, and I suppose other people manage. But I've often thought we've got friends who were in the REMI, and they live in Devizes. They come down and see me still. But I mean, I thought, well, their way of life in the army was different to ours, because ours was as one unit, all right, people would come and go, and people might go off on postings, but then they'd come back again. But that, being able to see and to keep the same friends, especially, I'm talking as well, when we were younger, before Keith was commissioned, and so when I'd made friends when I was a new army wife, I was able to keep those friends for years and years. Yeah. And then when we were in the officers' mess, one of our officers, I remember saying to me, well, you've got the best of both worlds, because you can still keep your friends, from the other life, and then you make new friends in the officers' mess, which of course you do, don't you? Yeah. So, yes, I just think.
At the end of the day, you've got 30, 40 years of growing up, all knitted together under one
Yes.
one unit.
Yes, you have, and especially when there are people that I knew from being young subalterns, like Richard Illingworth, who lived just over the hill, you know, and I knew him before he was married, and you know, and there are others like him as well, and of course, you know, you've
seen them grow up as well, and
yes, you do, I think, and so
see their achievements.
But we had such wonderful times, I think, and the thing about Keith was, he never ever, during all our married life, right until he came to Bovington to be QM of the Junior Leaders Regiment, he'd never had a posting away from the regiment. Never.
Goodness.
Obviously he'd had maybe, you know, the unaccompanied ones when we were young, going to America that time and being in Northern Ireland, but we'd never as a couple been posted away from the regiment. We were with the regiment all that time, which was a bit unusual, I think.
It was quite unusual. I think John Wisner was a bit like that.
But I think
it took him years before he eventually got a posting.
I think they knew a good thing when they had one. They wanted to hang on to. They wanted to hang on to him. That's what I think. Because he was always so dedicated. He was such a dedicated person, and you know, with his job. And you know, when he was at Bovington, I used to get cross with him and tell him off when he used to come home at 6 o'clock at night, and people would knock off at 4:30 and they'd be home, and he just it was just his way. He just really enjoyed his job. He
always had time for everybody else as well. I mean, that was one of the advantages as well. You know, he could always go in and talk to him about anything and everything.
Because you knew him, didn't you? And I mean, he was a people person. He just loved people, and he loved talking to people, and I think people loved him as well. I mean, I think he was a very
so knowledgeable about the job. I mean, you know, at the end of the day, he'd been there and done it. That sort of thing. So he was extremely helpful and good advisor.
And he did take a big interest in the First World War as well, which I don't know when that started, but he was quite a knowledgeable, and he had lots and lots of books, which I had to sell all these books, I mean, which was heartbreaking really. But when I came to this house, you know, moving from the other one, he had a big study, and he had this bookcase, he had all these military books, and I know that a lot of them would have cost a lot of money, and I just had to let them go en masse to somebody, you know, some bookseller who came and sort of took them. But I couldn't, you can't hang on to everything, can you?
No,
but he was pretty knowledgeable about all that kind of thing. But but yes, I had a very, very wonderful husband and a wonderful, happy, married army life, and no complaints.
Good.
No complaints about anything really.
A good life.
Was. Very good life.
Right. Thank you very much, Chrissy. That was excellent.